Darling, I can't wait for the company party tonight. We'll finally be able to show up together in public. This time, I won't have to invent an excuse to leave Alexis at home." Alexis Sterling read those devastating words on her husband's phone and felt her world shatter in seconds. 8 years of marriage. 8 years believing Clay protected her from corporate events out of love. 8 years of being the perfect, brilliant, and devoted wife who abandoned a promising career to champion his dreams. But in that moment, staring at the message he'd sent to Louisa, his 24-year-old assistant, one single, searing truth crystallized in Alexis's mind. She wasn't the protected wife. She was the hidden wife. Clay wasn't ashamed to take her to parties. He was simply ashamed of her. As she looked out the window of their penthouse in Tribeca, watching life move normally below, Alexis made a decision that would redefine everything. If Clay wanted to hide her, she would become utterly impossible to ignore. If he thought he could replace her with a naive young thing, he would soon discover he had catastrophically underestimated the woman he married. Revenge, after all, is a dish best served absolutely cold, and Alexis had all the patience in the world to prepare the perfect banquet. At the next company gala, the one where Clay planned to officially introduce Louisa as his new partner, he would receive the shock of his miserable life. Because Alexis Sterling, the simple woman he was too embarrassed to show off, was about to transform into the most powerful force he had ever encountered. The game was on, and this time, Alexis was setting the rules. The New York sun beat relentlessly on the windows of the Tribeca penthouse, but Alexis barely registered the heat. Her dark eyes, usually sharp and expressive, were fixed on the cell phone screen, trembling in her delicate hands. The messages she had just discovered on Clay's phone were like physical blows to her chest. "Darling, I can't wait for the company party tonight. We'll finally be able to show up together in public," wrote Louisa, her husband's assistant. "Me too, my life. This time, I won't have to invent an excuse to leave Alexis at home," replied Clay, the man with whom she had shared the last 8 years of her life. Alexis closed her eyes, feeling the foundation of her world crumbling. How many times had Clay claimed company parties were just business, that they'd be tedious for her, or that he preferred to protect her from the hostile corporate environment? Now, everything snapped into horrifying focus. The constant late nights, the hushed phone calls, the unfamiliar scent on his clothes. Clay wasn't protecting her. He was hiding her. The 29-year-old rose slowly from the Italian leather sofa they had chosen together on their honeymoon in Milan. Her bare feet touched the cold marble floor as she walked to the balcony, offering a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline. Down below, life proceeded normally. Taxis honked, people hurried, street vendors shouted. As if the world hadn't just ended for her, Alexis was everything any ambitious man could desire. A graduate of Harvard Law School, specializing in international corporate law, she had shelved a stellar career to back Clay's dreams when he decided to launch his import-export business. Her beauty was natural and striking. Black hair that fell in soft waves, skin that contrasted perfectly with her almond eyes, and a smile that could light up any room. But more than her appearance, it was her intellect that was lethal. Alexis possessed an analytical, strategic mind that had been the uncredited engine behind Clay's empire. She vetted contracts, identified legal loopholes, and suggested market expansions, all in the shadows, always behind the scenes. Now, watching the city's horizon, Alexis felt a transformation happening within her. The searing pain of betrayal was crystallizing into something different, something far more potent than mere anger. It was a cold, surgical determination, a thirst for justice that made her blood hum and her mind race. She walked back inside and cataloged every detail around her: the modern art she had chosen, the meticulously curated library of law and finance books. This was her life, her home. And Clay had trampled it all. Her phone vibrated. A text from Carmen, her best friend, and a society columnist. "Sweetie, saw a pic from Clay's company event on Instagram. You didn't go? He was with some blonde." Alexis didn't need to see the picture to know the woman. Louisa, the 24-year-old Clay hired 6 months ago. But this time was different. Alexis would no longer be the naive wife waiting at home. The annual gala for the American Importers Association was scheduled for next week at the Plaza Hotel. It was the most critical event on Clay's calendar, where he hoped to close million-dollar deals with international investors. A slow, calculating smile spread across Alexis's lips. She knew every detail of Clay's business, every client, every contract. After all, who did they think prepared the presentations and reviewed the financials? She was the unseen force behind Sterling Imports. That night, while Clay worked late, code for being with Louisa, Alexis locked herself in her private office. The walls were decorated with her degrees and certifications, achievements she had willingly set aside. Now, they were her weapons. She accessed his corporate email, a password she had known for years, and mapped every key meeting, presentation, and influential guest who would be present. Then, she began her counter-investigation, calling old law school contacts, former colleagues, and suppliers. Alexis was building her own network, preparing the ground for the devastating spectacle to come. When Clay finally arrived home at 3 a.m., he found his wife sleeping peacefully in bed. He had no idea she had spent the entire night plotting his downfall. In the days that followed, Alexis maintained her perfect routine, preparing his breakfast and feigning interest in his important meetings. But internally, she was a seasoned chess player, planning dozens of moves ahead. Clay and Louisa had fatally underestimated her. When the night of the gala arrived, Clay's world would be publicly annihilated, and Alexis would be there to witness every glorious second of his humiliation. The first phase of the game was complete, and she already had the upper hand. A week had passed since the devastating discovery, and Alexis's transformation was surgical. Outwardly, she maintained her routine, but inside, a ruthless war machine was running at full capacity. Her first move was brilliant in its simplicity. She contacted Helena Vance, the most exclusive corporate events organizer in New York, known for her impeccable contacts and absolute discretion. Helena secured Alexis a VIP invitation to the Importers Association Gala, not as Clay's wife, but as a representative of a fictitious European investment group interested in the U.S. market. The identity, complete with flawless documentation, was established. But Alexis's plan went deeper. She had learned that Richard Mendoza, Clay's fiercest rival in the import sector, would be at the party. Richard, a sophisticated, well-connected man of 55, had always shown a respectful interest in Alexis at the few social events they had attended. Over the past few days, Alexis had engineered casual encounters with Richard, chatting about art and culture, confirming that he understood Clay's failure to value her intellect. That afternoon, Alexis got the call she was waiting for from Carmen. "Alex, I got the intelligence you requested. Luisa Herrera, 24, business admin grad. She's attending the gala as his official escort." "Official?" Alexis repeated, the cold word fueling her resolve. Yes, Clay registered her as his strategic business partner for the event. He plans to introduce her to the international investors. Clay wasn't just cheating. He was publicly replacing her, positioning Louisa as a fundamental part of the business that Alexis had actually built. That evening, After Clay left for one of his late-night meetings, Alexis initiated Phase 2. She called Michael Santos, one of the most respected corporate lawyers in the country. Michael had been her law school professor and mentor. Alexis explained her situation with the detached precision of a seasoned negotiator. She focused not on the affair, but on the legal facts, her rights as a spouse regarding the family business, given her unacknowledged intellectual contribution to its success. "Alexis, this is gold," Michael had noted, examining the meticulous copies she had kept of every contract she'd vetted, every market analysis she'd prepared over 8 years. Clay, of course, had no idea she maintained such detailed records, assuming she was merely helping out. The next morning, Alexis awoke with a sense of potent empowerment. Today was the final staging. She was dressed impeccably, her hair and makeup flawless. When Clay came down for coffee, he was visibly surprised. "You look amazing today, Alexis," he commented distractedly, his mind clearly on Louisa. "Thank you, darling," she replied with a serene smile. "I have an important meeting today. I'm thinking of going back to work. Perhaps it's time to restart my career." Clay nearly choked on his coffee. An independent, ambitious wife would completely sabotage his plans with Louisa. "But sweetheart, there's no need. I take care of everything, you know that." "I know, love," Alexis said, kissing his cheek. "But a woman needs to feel useful, don't you think?" After Clay left, Alexis allowed herself a moment of chilling satisfaction. In just 2 days, at the pinnacle of his professional life, she would appear as the hurricane he never saw coming. The final countdown to his complete public destruction had begun. With only 3 days left, Alexis finalized her physical transformation. She spent the morning at an exclusive midtown salon, where a team amplified her natural beauty to a devastating level. Her black hair framed her face cinematically. The celebrity makeup artist highlighted her eyes with a perfect, elegant, and mesmerizing intensity. Her next stop was the private boutique of Paloma Herrera, a top designer. The dress had to scream power, elegance, and a clear message that she was no longer the submissive wife. The gown was a masterpiece, an exclusive Italian silk model in deep emerald green, perfectly contrasting her skin. The cut was sharp, corporate elegant, but with a subtle allure that guaranteed what every eye would be on her. The price was astronomical, but Alexis didn't hesitate. She had contributed to the fortune she was now using for its systematic dismantling. Meanwhile, a few blocks away, Clay was distracted, constantly messaging Louisa. He had no idea Alexis had discreetly installed monitoring software on his phone, an old digital law trick. Every message, every plan, and every move was known to her before it happened. That afternoon, Alexis had her final briefing with Helena Vance. Alexis would be introduced as Alexis Montenegro, representing a powerful European investment consortium. "Mr. Richard Mendoza has confirmed," Helena explained. "I subtly let slip that a highly intriguing investor would be attending. He was immediately curious. I also tipped off a few financial journalists. They'll be there for the main deals, but they're always hungry for new, beautiful faces." Alexis smiled. Everything was falling perfectly into place. At dinner that night, Alexis observed Clay. He was visibly tense, anxious about the upcoming gala, and the prospect of finally going public with Louisa. "You seem preoccupied, darling," Alexis commented casually. "Oh, just work. You know how stressful these corporate parties are. Lots of high-stakes business." "I imagine so. Are you going alone as usual?" Clay hesitated. A part of him wanted to confess, but he lacked the courage. "Yes, alone. You know you dislike those things." "True," Alexis agreed, sipping her wine. "But sometimes I wonder if I shouldn't force myself to participate more in your professional life. After all, we are a team, aren't we?" The subtle irony was completely lost on Clay, who was busy replying to a text from Louisa under the table. Later that night, Alexis finalized her timetable. 7:30 p.m. Clay and Louisa arrive. 7:45 p.m. Alexis's arrival is Montenegro. 8:15 p.m. First strategic contact with Richard Mendoza. 9:00 p.m. The moment of the devastating public reveal. The next morning, Alexis woke with a sensation of absolute calm. She prepared Clay's breakfast one last time as his deceived wife. "Good morning, love," she said, serving him his coffee exactly as he liked it. "Good morning. You look lovely today." "Thank you. By the way, tomorrow night I'm having dinner and a movie with Carmen. You don't mind, do you?" "Of course not. Have fun." Clay barely hid his relief. After he left, Alexis allowed herself a final, satisfied smile. Tomorrow night, Clay would discover that he had utterly underestimated the woman he married. And Louisa would learn that some positions are earned, not conquered through youthful naivete. The execution was less than 24 hours away, and it would be devastatingly perfect. The St. Regis Hotel Grand Ballroom had never hosted an event as critical as the Importers Association annual gala. At precisely 7:30 p.m., Clay arrived with Louisa on his arm. She was radiant in a light pink dress, her blonde hair falling in soft waves. Clay, impeccable in his black tuxedo, smiled with the smug confidence of a man finally making his conquest public. "Nervous, darling?" he whispered to Louisa as they handed their invitations to the receptionist. "A little," she admitted, squeezing his arm. "But I'm thrilled. Finally being by your side as your real woman." "Today is our first official day as a couple," Clay replied, kissing her hand. "The first of many." They were greeted enthusiastically. Clay introduced Louisa as his new strategic business partner, a title that made the young woman beam with pride, completely missing the subtly malicious glances of some of the older, wiser wives present. Meanwhile, a few miles away, Alexis was completing her final touches. She observed her reflection, the emerald green gown, the hair in a sophisticated low bun, the perfect makeup emphasizing her eyes. "Perfect," she murmured. "It's time to show them who I really am." At 8:10 p.m., the Mercedes-Benz pulled up to the St. Regis. Alexis stepped out with the grace of a queen. The doorman, stunned by her elegance, practically stammered. The elevator doors opened onto the party floor, and Alexis made her grand entrance. The effect was immediate. Conversation stuttered, heads turned, and whispers erupted. "Who is that stunning woman?" Helena Vance, positioned strategically, immediately approached. "Alexis Montenegro, what a pleasure. How was the flight from London?" "Excellent, thank you," Alexis replied in perfect English, with a slight, subtle accent that enhanced her mysterious identity. "I'm very excited to meet the American executives. I've heard wonderful things about the market." Across the room, Clay was exactly where Alexis had predicted, deep in conversation with executives from Tanaka Global Industries, a multi-million-dollar deal he'd been chasing for months. Louisa was smiling, clearly out of her depth in the technical discussions. "Mr. Sterling," said Hiroshi Tanaka, the regional director, "we are impressed with your proposal, but we require assurances regarding your firm's capacity to handle increased volume." "Absolutely, Mr. Tanaka," Clay replied confidently. "Our infrastructure was recently expanded, and we have strategic partnerships that allow us to—" He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes had zeroed in on the woman in the green dress, commanding the attention of the room. There was something intensely familiar about her, a physical shock that made his heart race. "Excuse me for a moment," he muttered, handing his card to Tanaka. "Louisa, continue the conversation. I'll be right back." Louisa, confused but obedient, tried to hold the Japanese executive's attention, while Clay slowly approached the mysterious woman. Across the room, Alexis had been introduced to Richard Mendoza exactly as planned. "Ms. Montenegro," Richard was saying, kissing her hand. "Helena tells me you represent a consortium interested in U.S. expansion. It would be an honor to discuss collaboration." "Ricardo," Alexis said softly, using the moment. "Is that not Clay Sterling of Sterling Imports? I've heard so much about his company." "Ah, yes. Clay is a competitor," Richard replied with a slight smirk. "Competent, I'll admit, though his methods are occasionally questionable." "How so?" "Well, there are rumors that Sterling Imports obtains privileged information on bids through, let's say, intimate relationships with key personnel." Richard was deliberately needling his rival. Alexis feigned shock, though this was a strategy she herself had developed for Clay years ago. At that moment, Clay finally reached the group. When his eyes met hers, his world dissolved. It was Alexis, his wife, but not the Alexis he knew. This woman radiated power, sophisticated confidence, and a lethal sensuality he had never allowed her to possess. For a moment, he froze, unable to process how his submissive, homebound wife had transformed into this captivating figure who controlled the attention of the entire gala. "Alexis," he whispered in utter disbelief, taking a step toward her. "I'm so sorry," she replied, with an Oscar-worthy performance of confusion. "I think you have me mistaken for someone else. I am Alexis Montenegro, representative of the Barcelona Investment Consortium." Richard watched the interaction with intense interest. "Do you two know each other?" She... Clay stammered, completely undone. "I apologize. She bears a striking resemblance to someone I know." Alexis smiled with chilling precision. "Ah, how interesting. You must be Clay Sterling of Sterling Imports. I've heard a great deal about your company. Richard here was just telling me about the innovative methods you employ." The word innovative carried a venomous undertone that made Clay flinch. There was a look in those eyes, his wife's eyes, that screamed that something was terribly, fundamentally wrong. "Alexis, what the hell are you doing here?" he whispered. Low enough only for her to hear. "I apologize, Mr. Sterling, but you continue to confuse me. Perhaps we should focus on business. I hear you are attempting to finalize a contract with Tanaka Industries." Clay's blood ran cold. How did she know about the Japanese deal? It was classified information he had only shared with... He glanced at Louisa, still across the room. Suddenly, everything became brutally clear. Alexis knew. Somehow his wife had discovered everything. "Ricardo," Alexis continued, her voice soft as silk, but cutting like a razor. "You mentioned questionable methods. Could you elaborate? As an investor, I need a clear understanding of the ethical standards of potential partners." Richard, utterly delighted to embarrass his competitor in front of a potential investor, smiled. "Well, there are persistent rumors that Sterling Imports obtains information on bids through, shall we say, intimate relationships with public sector employees." Alexis feigned deep concern. "Intimate relationships? What kind of relationships?" "The kind that can compromise the fairness of certain business decisions," Richard replied, looking pointedly at Clay. Clay was turning visibly pale. He didn't know how Richard knew any of this, but it was dangerously close to the truth. And worse, he was being exposed in front of his own wife, who was, through some diabolical twist, pretending to be a foreign investor. At that precise moment, Louisa walked up, confused by Clay's long absence. "Honey, the Japanese gentlemen are asking where you went. They want to finalize the contract details." The silence was deafening. Louisa had just called Clay honey in front of Richard Mendoza and the mysterious investor. Even worse, she hadn't realized the investor was actually her lover's wife. Richard raised an eyebrow, instantly understanding the dynamics. Alexis maintained an expression of slight, curious confusion. "Your assistant?" Alexis asked, Clay innocently. She... Clay was utterly lost. How could he explain Louisa without exposing the affair? How could he maintain the professional facade while his personal life publicly imploded? Actually, Louisa piped up, with an innocent confidence that made Alexis feel a mix of pity and irritation. I'm Clay's business partner, and also, well, we're a couple. The words exploded over the group like a grenade. Richard couldn't hide a satisfied grin, finally having concrete evidence that Clay used personal relationships for professional gain. And Alexis? Alexis smiled. It was not a kind or understanding smile. It was the smile of a predator who had finally cornered her prey. How fascinating, she said, her voice remaining soft but carrying a chill that made Clay shiver. And your wife? Does she know about this partnership? Clay's world definitively collapsed in that second. He looked at Alexis. Alexis, disguised as an international investor, and knew the moment of truth had arrived. There was no running. There was no lying left. The tension was suffocating. The 5 seconds of silence after Alexis's question felt like an eternity. Clay was frozen, hands trembling slightly as he processed the magnitude of his catastrophe. Louisa, oblivious to the investor's true identity, smiled, believing she had finally claimed her spot in the limelight. His wife, Louisa laughed, the sound cutting the air like a funeral bell. Oh, Miss Montenegro, that's a complicated story. Clay is finalizing his separation. She's a very simple woman. She knows nothing about business, you know. Just stays home, no ambition. She's not like us. Modern, independent women. Every word from Louisa was a hammer blow to Clay, who watched in horror as his mistress utterly destroyed any chance he had of salvaging his dignity. Richard watched the entire exchange with the fascination of a spectator witnessing his rival's slow-motion breakdown. Alexis maintained her icy smile, preparing for the finishing blow. What an interesting perspective, Alexis said smoothly. And tell me, miss, forgive me, I missed your name. Luisa Herrera, the young woman replied proudly. I have a degree in business administration, and I've been a strategic consultant for Sterling Imports for several months. Strategic consultant, Alexis repeated, tasting the words. What impressive responsibilities for someone so young. Tell me, what kind of strategies have you personally developed for the firm? Louisa flushed, clearly unable to answer. Her actual role was purely administrative. Well, I help with the general organization of operations. General organization, Alexis murmured, feigning a mental note. And the market analyses, the feasibility studies, the international contract negotiations? Louisa's silence was deafening. Richard began to chuckle openly, realizing he was watching an elegant massacre. You see, Alexis continued, her voice gaining a dangerous edge. It's fascinating how family companies operate. Often, the truly strategic mind behind the success is someone who works tirelessly in the shadows, without public acknowledgement. Clay closed his eyes, knowing exactly where she was going. For example, Alexis pressed on, discreetly pulling a few documents from her clutch. I was reviewing some materials on Sterling Imports before our potential partnership, and I discovered something quite fascinating. Most of the company's expansion strategies, the most innovative market analyses, even the most lucrative contracts, they all appear to have been developed by someone with advanced legal training, someone with a specialization in international corporate law. Richard leaned forward, deeply intrigued. Clay tried to interrupt, but Alexis continued ruthlessly. But here is the most interesting part. Officially, Sterling Imports has never employed a full-time corporate attorney. So, who developed these brilliant strategies? She paused dramatically, letting the question hang in the air. Unless, she continued, a devilish smile playing on her lips. The truly strategic mind was someone very close to Mr. Sterling. Someone with intimate access to all the company's information. Someone who worked tirelessly behind the scenes, never receiving public credit. By now, a significant crowd had gathered, drawn by the palpable tension. "Are you referring to someone specific?" Richard asked, utterly captivated. "I am referring," Alexis said, her voice now carrying a cold, razor-sharp edge, "to Clay Sterling's wife, Alexis Sterling, a woman with a law degree from Harvard, specializing in corporate law from the University of Barcelona. A woman who abandoned a promising career to champion her husband's dreams. A woman who spent 8 years developing every strategy, reviewing every contract, and analyzing every market opportunity that transformed Sterling Imports from a small family business into an import empire." The silence was absolute. The crowd was stunned. Clay was ashen, finally grasping the full scale of his wife's discovery and meticulously planned public attack. Louisa looked nervously at Clay, seeking support, but he was frozen. "But you know what's most interesting?" Alexis continued, now addressing Louisa directly, who was beginning to look physically ill. "It's that this simple wife, who knows nothing about business, is in fact the true architect of the success you are now attempting to claim as your own." Louisa finally understood the devastating truth. The journalists, led by Martin Restrepo and Carlos Vega of Expansion magazine, who Helena had queued up, surged toward the group, cameras flashing frantically. "Ms. Montenegro," Martin Restrepo asked, "could we get an exclusive interview about female intellectual property in the corporate world? I think you have a fascinating story here about how talented women are systematically erased from the successes they help build." "That would be fantastic," Alexis replied, already in full executive mode. "We can schedule it for tomorrow, and I suppose you'd also be interested in investigating the ethical practices of Sterling Imports. I have extensive documentation on questionable methods of contract acquisition." As the journalists scrambled to secure the interview, and Richard offered his additional perspective on his rival's dubious practices, Louisa finally found the courage to speak. You really are his wife?" Alexis turned to her with a look that mixed pity and sharp disdain. "I am. Or rather, I was. Because after tonight, I believe our marriage has definitively reached its conclusion. I didn't know you were capable, powerful." "No, darling. You believed the simple narrative Clay presented about me, the ambitionless, stay-at-home wife. You never once stopped to wonder how a thoroughly mediocre man like Clay managed to build a corporate empire all by himself." Louisa couldn't respond. Tears streamed down her face as the magnitude of her foolishness became clear. Alexis turned to Clay, who remained silently, utterly destroyed. "As for you, my dear ex-husband, I hope you enjoyed your final party as the owner of Sterling Imports. Because starting tomorrow, when my lawyers file the divorce papers, you will discover exactly what percentage of the company legally belongs to me." She paused, letting the words sink in. "You see, for 8 years, I meticulously documented every single contribution I made to the company, every strategy, every analysis, every contract. And under U.S. corporate law, spouses are entitled to compensation for intellectual contribution to family businesses. Furthermore," Alexis continued, a pure, venomous smile touching her lips, "Ricardo, I believe we discussed a potential partnership between your firm and my future independent venture." "It would be an honor, Alexis," Richard responded, kissing her hand with genuine admiration. "A woman with your intellect and experience would be an invaluable partner." Alexis turned back to Clay and Louisa one last time. "Revenge," she said softly, her voice an icy threat, "is truly a dish best served cold, and you two have just been publicly served." With that, she took Richard's arm and walked away, leaving behind the utter wreckage of the life she had built with Clay, and the shattered dreams of naive Louisa. Behind her, she heard the sound of cameras clicking furiously and journalists' voices demanding aggressive answers. Alexis Sterling had died that night. In her place, a woman stronger, smarter, and decidedly more dangerous had been born. And her empire was just beginning. 6 months later, the morning sun bathed the executive office on the top floor of the One World Trade Center, one of New York's most prestigious buildings. Alexis Montenegro, the name Alexis adopted professionally post-divorce, delicately adjusted her porcelain cup as she reviewed the financial reports for her new company, Montenegro Strategic Consulting. 6 months. Only 6 months had passed since that transformative night at the St. Regis, and Alexis had built an empire that rivaled anything Clay had ever dreamed of achieving. Richard Mendoza entered the office, elegant as ever, but with a new look in his eyes, genuine admiration and respect. "Good morning, Alexis," he said. "The Q3 numbers are staggering. Our joint venture has surpassed all projections." "Good morning, Richard. Please sit down. We have much to discuss regarding the expansion into Europe." The joint venture had become one of the most profitable partnerships in the U.S. international trade sector. But the true pleasure wasn't just the financial success. It came from the poetic justice of her ascension being built on the ruins of Clay's arrogance. "Before we start," Richard said, pulling out a magazine, "did you see this week's cover of Forbes?" Alexis smiled. Her photo dominated the cover of the leading business publication, accompanied by the headline, "Alexis Montenegro, the strategic mind revolutionizing international trade." The 8-page feature celebrated her flawless education, innovative vision, and almost supernatural ability to identify market opportunities. It didn't mention Clay directly, but everyone in the industry knew exactly where her experience originated. "It's an excellent piece," Alexis commented modestly. "Modesty?" Richard laughed. "Alexis, in 6 months, you've built a firm that triples the annual revenue of traditional companies. You've transformed 3 family firms into market leaders. If there's any exaggeration, it's yours." Alexis's phone vibrated. A message from Carmen, her best friend, and now her firm's communications director. "You need to see this. CNN International just called. They want to do a documentary on women who turned personal failure into spectacular business success. And they want to include you on the list of the 30 most influential women in American business." "Good news?" Richard asked. "Always good news when you control your own narrative," Alexis replied philosophically. While they discussed the European expansion, Alexis allowed herself a brief flashback to those dark days 6 months ago, when she felt her world had ended. She had been naive, reducing her own dreams to prop up Clay's. But perhaps that humiliation was necessary. Perhaps she needed to be underestimated to learn never to underestimate herself again. "Any news on him?" "Your ex-husband?" Richard asked. Alexis paused. Yes, she had news. Clay had desperately tried to save Sterling Imports, but the combination of the media exposure, the loss of crucial contracts, and the divorce proceedings, where Alexis legally proved her intellectual contribution, had been devastating. Sterling Imports filed for bankruptcy 3 months after that fateful night. Clay now worked as a sales manager for a mid-sized firm, a brutal fall from grace. And Louisa? Poor Louisa had learned the cruelest lesson. Clay, desperate and humiliated, had blamed the young woman for his downfall. The relationship ended in 6 weeks, leaving Louisa unemployed and professionally ruined. "I have some information," Alexis replied carefully. "But I prefer to focus on the present and the future. The past has served its purpose." Richard nodded, acknowledging the wisdom. "You are an extraordinary woman, Alexis. To turn betrayal into triumph, humiliation into an empire, few could do it. Every woman has that strength within her, Richard, Alexis replied, standing up to greet the arrival of executives from Hoffman Industries for a meeting about a European partnership. Sometimes we just need an extreme situation to find it. As she walked toward the door, her Louboutin heels clicking on the marble, Alexis passed the full-length mirror. The woman looking back was unrecognizable from the submissive, naive wife of 6 months ago. This Alexis radiated confidence, power, and success. Her eyes shone with the sharp intellect of someone who had learned never to again undervalue her own worth. She was no longer the wife Clay was ashamed to introduce. She was the woman he could never, ever win back. And as she entered the boardroom, Alexis Montenegro, the former hidden wife, smiled, not a smile of revenge, but a smile of absolute, genuine satisfaction. She had proved something far more important than her ability to take revenge. She had proven her ability to rise. And that, after all, was the sweetest triumph of all.